And well, I have lots to say about Van Gogh. He's really one of these very important late 19th century artists. I'm sure a lot of you know some of the stories about him already. Well, as I said earlier, he died presumably of suicide at 37. But when he goes to the south of France, his color palette explodes and becomes very, very bright and colorful.
Yeah, but he also goes insane.
So he had emotional issues throughout, right? He had different stories. I recently read excerpts from his letters to Theo, his brother, right, for like 20 years, well, 15 years anyway, of letters. And, well, he had, troubles, right? He's socially awkward, had trouble making friends, and so on. Really quite an interesting character. And this whole stuff, everything he did, there's some 800 paintings he made in 10 years. Right? It's kind of amazing what he churned out in such a short period. And the vast bulk of it that was really exceptional happened in the last 2 years, right? From that time in 88 through 90 when he commits suicide. So to come back to that story, he's in Arles. He has a problem with Gogh, so he tries to invite Gogh down to be with them. He wants to set up an artist colony and all that. And Gogh is kind of a jerk, and they have arguments. And you've heard about Van Gogh gets mad at him, and he takes a razor blade to his ear and cuts off at least part of his ear. We're not sure how much, but at least part of it. Story that's not exactly confirmed, that he tried to give this to a girlfriend who was probably just a prostitute. Was clearly having some serious emotional issues and all that. Ends up in a mental institution down in the south of France for some time. Does lots of paintings while he's doing that, and then gets out, moves north to Paris, near Paris anyway, and then will ultimately, again, we don't know for sure, but he presumably takes a gun. We don't know where he would have gotten a gun, but takes a gun, maybe even a shotgun, and shoots himself in the stomach. And then dies 2 days later. It's like, in the end, anyway, he ends up dying, having only sold one painting, one sort of important painting. He sold other little drawings and so on, but just one painting for, I guess it was 400 francs, which would have been a nice payoff in those days, but not, he wasn't certainly rich. So here is his room, one of his rooms in Arles, right, that he made up for himself as his living space and as kind of a studio for himself. So when we look at this painting, what jumps out for you? What seems?
Colors, it also seems like from the animated movie.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. The colors are unusual. They seem like it is kind of like a Disney thing. It feels very colorful and not realistic. We can't imagine that the room looks exactly like this. And so this is an important detail with Van Gogh, is that he's not the only one, he's not absolutely the first one, but he really disconnects with this notion of feeling a need to paint the colors exactly the way he sees them, right? He is, interesting thing is he really is an observational painter in the sense that he does some, in fact, Gauguin tries to get him to work from memory, right? Gauguin, you don't need to do that. Work from memory, it's better if you work from memory. But Van Gogh, he spends years making drawing after drawing and painting after painting, trying to train himself to be able to, see things. And he always kind of has this sort of clunky, awkward style. But if you ever get a chance to see an exhibit of his drawings are beautiful, right? It's got a weirdness to it, but there's his weird grace that's in them. It's quite beautiful. And so he's making these paintings, and he's absorbed some of the color theory that's come out in the late 19th century, right? He's learned about color contrasting colors or complementary colors, and you see it in all the paintings. I can just paint to, like if you look at the portrait across the room there, you've got the man that's in the sort of mustard jacket against the purplish background. Those aren't exactly color contrasting, complementary colors, but they're close, yellow and purple. Here he's going to play with this kind of orange that's next to the blue, right? That they jump out. So color contrast, this is one of the things that's interesting about it, is when you have, so the traditional contrasting colors are red against green, yellow against purple, and blue against orange. And one of the things that's interesting is that, you can have the perfectly optically contrasting colors side by side, but you can also play with variations on that. And he kind of does this here, right? This is sort of a yellow-orange. And this is a blue, but it's blue with a lot of white in it. So it's not as absolute maximum as it could be, but it begins to create a tension, right? It sort of creates a sort of, if you think of it a little bit like the color version of black against white, right? Pure black against pure white jumps out at us from across the room. We see it very clearly. And that painting, for example, jumps out at us because those colors are fairly close to color contrast. And so as you get close to those color contrasts, that can sort of give it more energy or less energy, and Van Gogh went all in for lots of energy in his. So what do we make of this bedroom? What stands out here about this one? Right? There's the color issue of it. Anything else that seems important? The texture. Okay, so that's something that's very important in all of his paintings. And he did cross paths with Cézanne, but I don't think they spent much time with each other. But there is a little bit of that sort of parallel line quality, right? But here, the floorboards, you imagine he's trying to follow the direction of the floorboards. The cane on the seats, he's trying to follow that. And some of his paintings, when you get up close to them, I don't know if any of these do it too much, but some of them have an amazing thickness of painting, right? It's like really three-dimensional. There's so much paint that's put on it. So it's very kind of visceral in a certain way, and there's a lot of directional aspect. There's a lot of directional aspect to the way in which the paint is applied, right, to create movement and energy. And so, well, you've got the Starry Sky over there. That it's not the most famous one, but you've got a little bit of that happening there. So what else about this bedroom painting here? So the colors are weird. Very bright. Does it seem like a normal room outside of the color? It looks
kind of like a cartoon, like
definitely
a
like,
kind of movie.
right?
It's not realistic.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel real in a certain way, and a lot of that is the colors. There's a kind of, like if you look at how the chairs sit on the ground, even that's a bit weird. Like where are the shadows in this room, right? You don't really have a sense of the shadows there. Right, you know that there's got to be something casting shadows. So there's a strangeness that happens from that. But even the orientation of everything, right? Because there are no shadows, the chairs and the table don't really sit on the ground, right? They seem to float above it in a certain way. So there's a weirdness about the whole scene. And another thing that strikes me is that the perspective feels a little bit off also, right? It feels like the room is it like really narrow in the back and really wide? It doesn't look like it should somehow. And again, I don't want to read too much into this, but it's clear that Van Gogh is kind of up and down, having problems while he's in Arles. It, for the most part, reads to me as kind of what he was trying to do. He writes about it in his letters, right? He's trying to make this look really nice so it can be welcoming when Gauguin comes, and this will be a place where Gauguin can be happy in, and so on. So I think there is a little bit of that, but there's also a sense of it being its own little kind of contained world. Now, because the colors are so bright and kind of cheerful, it doesn't feel like really ominous to me, personally. But there is a way in which it feels like a world unto itself. Right? We see windows in the background, we see suggestions of doors, but none of those open up. Right? That's kind of an interesting detail, symbolically, right? Well, again, are we taking too big a leap or not? I'm not sure, but symbolically, there's a way in which it seems sort of sealed off. Some of you probably have heard of the French 20th century philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre. And Sartre, one of his famous plays, is called Huis Clos, or No Exit. And it's kind of an interesting play where there are these three people that presumably have died, and they're in this room that's sort of decorated much more nicely and richly than this is. But they're kind of hanging out, and they're not quite sure why they're there exactly. But they kind of guess that it's probably the afterlife and so on. But they're stuck in this room, right? It's like that's it for eternity is what they kind of come to. And again, it doesn't have that dark feel to it, but there's a little of the sense of this is the sort of extent of the whole reality, right? And everything that's outside is closed off in a certain way. So maybe that suggests a little bit Van Gogh and his own sort of in his own world quality.